People outside the church, you go to church, you take your conversation to a church conversation, inviting people to a church or having some doctrinal discussion like you're having in the hallways here. I'm telling you, they have allergic reactions like I do to cats. And they're not coming around. But so our challenge, and I'll come back to this if I think about it, our challenge is how do we move this thing from a church-centric kind of approach to a street level? Because that's where movements happen. And so, in fact, now, by the way, we have reached these stellar heights of antipathy to Christian church stuff while we have been building the best churches we've ever had. I mean, does anyone here doubt that? We know how to do church. And by golly, we've got the best facilities we've ever had. Some of you have built them. You've raised millions of dollars in these last, I've been in some of them. I mean, we've got Six Flags Over Jesus, every city in America. Sometimes even Disney World. I mean, I speak at these places where you've got movable seats and upfitted and outfitted and retrofitted, and we have executive chefs in our churches. We have not just chefs, executive chefs. I was recently at one of your places, and the executive chef was preparing the Subway sandwiches for our lunch at the vestry meeting, and the selection of chips was good. But what I'm saying is could you imagine such a? I mean, I come from a Baptist background. I know that's a shock to some of you, and barely rates Christian. And let me tell you, y'all fight way too nice. I grew up. Hey, you'd already be done, bro. I mean, you have your head on a pole, and we'd be on to the next guy. So, we fight for real. Not pseudo stuff. So anyway, in my tribe, kids, and adults, they enter the Baptist through the log flume rides. We've got these fabulous facilities. We have smoke machines so we know when the Spirit comes in. And usually it's when the band is doing their stuff, and then I get up to speak and they cut the smoke machine off, which kind of a symbol of something. But my point is, we've got the best churches we've ever had, and look at the result. So I'm here today to try to get you out of the church business because it's not going to deliver. You see, we put all of our eggs in that basket, all this congregation, and I can tell you we are getting the results of it's a shift really in, I'm losing weight up here. It's a shift in literally where the gravity is. I mean, we've got to make a bigger turn. Talk about every 500 years, something that from a Ptolemaic universe to a Copernican universe, from a church-centric way of seeing everything, so that when we go out to start churches, we start another church. We start another congregation, which typically means we start a worship service and hope a church grows up around it. And instead of cloning that, instead of reproducing, to move to a kingdom-centric universe shifts the perspective on everything and expands the bandwidth of what we think, how we think church expresses itself. Now, I brought one slide, or I didn't bring it, I sent it, or someone's got it here, and let's go ahead and toss it up there. And because when I talk about missional church, this is the background, and I want to kind of unpack this a bit and then make some comments about where I think this might lead you as a movement. But when I think of missional church, this is what I'm thinking. We'll just go ahead and run the whole thing. It's the people of God partnering with him in his redemptive mission in the world. And every one of those phrases is critical and important. But I can tell you, this is not how I grew up thinking about church. It is not how most North Americans grew up thinking about church, because just look at that first line. Even though that's a biblical phrase, it's taken right out of, it starts with Genesis 12, with the creation of a people by God, the call of Abraham, and runs all the way through the scripture. Even though that phrase is biblical and all that kind of stuff, I grew up in a world where church was, here's the church, here's the steeple, open the church. And we didn't get to the people till we got past the church and the steeple. because we thought of church as an organization. We thought of church as an institution. This is why you have been smart to put off, if I understand what you've been doing. I don't pretend to actually understand, but I'm a consultant, so I can still speak with great authority into it on a drive-by shooting here. But it's smart. In fact, most church, I should finish a sentence. Actually, I should get one going, then ride it all the way through. The people that start out with form and structure and organization, it's a dead end. I mean, you have to wait and you have to see who you are first, and then figure out a way to figure out a form and a structure around you that supports that and will ensure that DNA it continues to move forward from the first generation on to the second. And so thinking of church as an organic people allows you to do that. And by the way, it also has incredibly important implications for, again, thinking of how the church expresses itself in the world. If we think of ourselves as the people of God and a non-organizational beginning point, then it allows us to move church from a noun kind of experience into a verb, a way of being. This is why being a missionary society is a way of being in the world. And missional followers of Jesus think of church as a verb. We church our way through life. We don't go to church. We are the church. Now, I'm not all the church, and you're not all the church, but I am everywhere I am, the church is. Everywhere you are, the church is, because the church is the people of God. Now, that allows me now to think, well, then how do I church in my neighborhood? Not just at church. How do I church at the office? Not just at church. How do I church in my vocation? How do I church at school? How do I church even on Delta, for crying out loud, which is basically time off, I think. And so you've got a way of seeing how you impact all of, and you're churching your way through. A first century believer never would figure out that phrase that we use about going to church. That would be so bizarre to them. It would be bizarre to them to think about belonging to a church. Are you kidding? I belong to me. I'm going to go to me. You see, but because we've had this institutional something or other with church out here instead of in here, then we've had church as a what, and not church as a who. And so it's about Whoville, really, and really, church, isn't it all the fights? So many times are about this institutional stuff out here, which confounds the mission, of course, because anytime we get all wrapped up about the form and the stuff like that, it takes us off mission. You know this. And how the form, and we've got to come to the place where we can say, you look different from me, and that's okay. What part of this was what did we get in terms of our monocultural, our standardized approach to everything, that everyone has to pursue this exactly the way I'm pursuing it? Or because if we are people, if we are organic, then it means, just like Paul's description of the body, it means some of us have different body functions and we look different. But we need all of us to be the church in the world today. It's really very critical. In fact, every time I run into a church planter, for instance, that says, I feel called to plant a church, I say something like, I doubt it. I mean, just to kind of, mess with them a little bit. And I say, now, I see, because if you want to plant a church, because everybody that keeps using a church doesn't get it. It's about the church. In fact, there's not a single reference in the New Testament to church smaller than a city. And I may come back to that again if I can remember it. That's really important, because God sees his people already deployed across all domains of culture, not congregationalized, sitting around doing church. That is not God's idea of church. That is ours. And we did that to create a religion that we could control. And we created a clergy-dependent system because fear and control drive most religions. And so it's just a natural follow. But that is not how God sees his people. Now, by the way, this people of God is not just some kind of amorphous, nice idea. There is content to that. And the content is the covenant that God made with Abraham when he ran the card through the reader and said, Abe, this is the deal I'm going to cut with you. I'm going to bless you so you can turn around and bless everybody else who's not your tribe, not in your clan, people who are running rum off the coast or sacrificing kids to Molech, people who vote Democrat, people who are Republican, people who pull for Clemson, people. Well, that was the greatest bowl game in the history of the world. The Orange Bowl this year. It just wasn't long enough for those of us who are Gamecock fans. But anyway, so you have this notion that that the people of God has a specific content, and it's this: we have one job to do. Gang, we have made this thing so complicated. Holy cow! I mean, hell is the most complicated place in the universe. In case you don't know this, it's the most religious place in the universe as well. They're always having religious services in hell. And it's very complex, and people can't figure. It's like swimming through glue. You can't get anywhere, But the medieval feel, the mystics were right. At the heart of the universe is simplicity. God is simple. We have one job to do. It's to bless the world. That's our job. Now, we've done a lot of stuff to build towers of Babel when God said, bless the world. That's your job. I want people to know my heart for them, and my heart for them is to bless them. And so I want you to incarnate those blessings. I'm going to come. I'm going to in myself and wrap it up in flesh and show you. That's your job. And so, if I were at your church Sunday and, preaching or whatever it is, persecuting your folks. And there again, since I'm not going to be at your place Sunday, don't you feel better already? The life is good. You just got. So I would tell them, let's go out and practice being the people of God this week by blessing people intentionally. Intentionally now, not a random act of kindness like rake and run. I'm talking about something that creates an opportunity for God to show up and show off, because that's what acts of blessing do. And then I would tell people to tell their stories. By the way, I just got an email this week from a guy, he's an Episcopalian, and he knew I was going to be speaking to a group of his colleagues. And he says, pass along that when you came and challenged us to be people of blessing and start telling the story, he says, for just this past week, we take blessing stories now along with prayer requests. And he said, just this past week, the number of blessing stories now, when people are saying, how can I ask God to bless you? And then God gets in there and something wonderful happens, and they have conversation with people about God, not about church, and all that. And he says, the number of blessing stories now has outnumbered the prayer requests for 2 weeks in a row.